Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Industry Insiders. Today I'm joined by Drew Cifrodelli. Is that right, Drew? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, the Americans pronounce it that way, and the only reason I don't is because people sometimes will call me Bruce Fridelli, which is kind of funny.
Ah,
So I say Drew Cifrodelli.
Cifrodelli. Cifrodelli, a real estate professional with a really unique background. Drew actually started his career in data analysis and IT, and today he applies that analytical mindset to real estate, helping buyers and sellers make smarter decisions using real market data. He also focuses heavily on New Jersey's Barrier Island coastal market and has built a specialty in probate real estate transaction, which is a unique niche among agents. Drew, great to have you on.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Let's dive right into your story with your journey. You mentioned during your prep call that you actually started in IT and data analysis before moving into real estate. What was the moment where you realized that analytical background could actually become a competitive advantage in this industry?
That was pretty early on because I remember thinking to myself, people in the industry seem to treat it like some kind of art or magic, you know. And I said, there's got to be like a rule of large numbers, right? We have, especially when houses started to be displayed on the internet, and it was obvious that there was data out there, like how many times was this house showing up in a search? How many times were people clicking on the house within the search? How many times were people clicking on the photos within the search or within, that listing? And so when you start to be able to track all that, and those are some big numbers, as it turns out, I was surprised to see that on any given day, one of my listings would get anywhere from 500 to just under 1,000 in a day on the internet. And I thought, is that right? Is that
Hmm.
number, like how is it possible that that many people, are searching for a house and my listing is popping up in that search criteria? It turns out that, obviously people are putting in searches in their big wide ranges, oh, give me 300 to 500,000, or give me all the four bedrooms, or whatever it is they're searching for. So they modify those searches throughout the day. They tweak them and shrink them down and whatever. So you may have several hundred individual people searching, doing multiple searches in a day, and it adds up pretty quickly to the number of times your house shows up in a search result. But when I saw those numbers were so large, and because of my data background, I thought there's got to be a way to figure out, will my listing sell, and how quick will it sell? So I started to track how many times I would, or out of, like, let's say, what was the minimum number of search results online that would get me showings? And it turned out it was somewhere in the range of 600. And yeah, if I didn't get at least 600, back at that point in time, you didn't get nobody showed up at the house to look at it, which is pretty amazing. Yeah.
Hmm.
And if I was somewhere in the range of like 750, I knew I had it priced right because I was gonna, get a lot of showings, and I knew it was gonna sell. And if I had like 900, then it was kind of obvious that I might have priced it a little bit aggressively, and I might have an opportunity to raise the price, or I'm going to probably end up with multiple bidding.
Yeah, that kind of probably plays a little bit into my next question for you. So you said something that resonated with me that most clients simply want to know they didn't overpay or leave money on the table. So how does your data model and analysis approach to help buyers and sellers actually feel confident about that?
So, I mean, people are people, right? At the end of the day,
Mm.
you can't always control their confidence. But the fact of the matter is that after a while, I started to see that there was also patterns in the number of showings. So, where the rubber meets the road is somebody makes an appointment with an agent. to come in and take a look at the property. It takes a lot of effort, coordination. I don't count open houses, showings at open houses or not. The way that I do things, I don't do an open house on the first weekend that the house is on the market because I don't want to mess up my numbers because I'm trying to keep the numbers pure. So I look and say, how many showings am I going to get in the first 7 days on market? And those showings have to be booked with an agent. That takes a level of effort, right? And so in the first 7 days, I can get a pretty good idea what trajectory my listing is on. And then I have a chart that I use when I meet with my customer prior to listing the house. I go, this is the chart that I use to predict whether or not we have your house sold or house priced correctly or not. So, in the first 7 days, we should be on path to this number. At the end of the second week, we should be about here. And in the third week, if we're not already getting offers, so we should be here, or we might have to make an adjustment to get the showings, to increase the showings. And I have a table that I use, and it lays out just how much I think we would need to adjust the price based on how many showings we get and what kind of response we get. And it's not a rule like they have to follow it. It's a guidance system, right? So if you they can take my advice or leave it, right? And so my job is to give them as much information as I can for them to make an educated decision. Houses that are on the market for more than 45 days, generally speaking, the public knows that after 45 days, something's off. Either the condition is a problem or the price is a problem. You end up having a price problem in the end. So that's the iterative approach to it. How many showings do we get? What kind of feedback do we get? Is the house too bright, too dark, too smelly? Things that we can change. We'll make those modifications. If it's a color or something's worn out, as long as it's not expensive, maybe we can paint a room. Maybe we can put a new floor in, right? Sometimes you get, it's too big, it's too small, it faces the wrong direction. Nothing we can do about that, right?
Right.
So if it's feedback that we can actually do something about, we try to make those changes, and then we make the adjustment to the price. We get more showings. Those issues have been resolved, and the house sells. So that's why I have a 42-day promise. The first 21 days is to test the market, and the second 21 days is to make sure that it's sold within the 45 days. I say 42-day promise because it's 2 21-day periods, 3 weeks each. But the reality is the idea is to make sure that we have maybe a week in between those two phases that we can make changes if we need to. And then it's sold within the next 21 days.
Do you believe that's a system that could apply anywhere in any market in any part of the country? Or do you think that that kind of approach might be unique to certain areas, like the area that you might be in?
It's a good question. So it doesn't apply in high-end real estate, right? Down here on the Barrier Island, we have $10 million properties, $20 million properties. They're a different animal, right? That's not. So this is middle market, right? So you're looking at, somebody, let's say 2 standard deviations from the curve in any given market, right? So obviously down here on the Barrier Island, you're going to have the median price is somewhere in the area of like $1.5 million, maybe $1 million or maybe $2 million, somewhere in that range. So it'll work in that price range because there's enough competition for those houses and they're getting mortgages. So it's a basic standard kind of market. And they may be looking to own or occupy it, and they may looking to live in it year round. It doesn't work if it's an investor. So investors come in and they're saying, I'm going to rent this thing and it has to be profitable to rent it. It doesn't work. That's not. So, every county has every county does a market analysis of what the average or median price is for their county. It works great within 2 standard deviations of the mean for any county.
Yeah. Interesting. So you're focusing heavily on the Barrier Island market in New Jersey, which is a very specific geographic niche. You mentioned on your call that you've been boating there for 15 years now, and you know the waterways and you know the lifestyle really well. How important is that local lifestyle knowledge when helping clients buy this waterfront property?
I guess it depends a little bit on whether or not they've, rented down here for years prior to buying, but for somebody just coming in from the outside, it's significant. I mean, we're in a flood zone, right? I mean, everything around here is being lifted up, 6, 8 feet off the ground. Also, if you are a boater, lagoons. Like, what's a good lagoon? You know, what's a bad lagoon? With the depth of the lagoon, the width of a lagoon. Is it a dead end lagoon where stuff is going to accumulate throughout the year? Some of the lagoons get really nasty with just debris and stuff just accumulating there by the end of the summer. Which side of the lagoon do you want to be on? Do you want your backyard facing the sun, or do you want your front yard facing the sun? Turns out that houses that are have their backyard facing the sun on the same lagoon will be 100 to $200,000 more than the house right across the lagoon, because if your backyard is in the sun all day, you've got an extended season. We have what's called local summer down here, and so in September, yeah, when everybody goes home, it is the most beautiful time of the year to be here, right? So if you're somebody who's coming down and you're thinking, you know what, I'm going to buy this house, I'm going to rent it in the summertime a few weeks so that it minimizes my carrying costs or covers my taxes or something like that, then you're going to want to be down here in September and October. There's all kinds of stuff down here for the locals to do. Every weekend there's some kind of an event. The water's still warm. The weather's still nice. It's a unbelievable time to be here.
Not quite as crowded as during the summer.
Right.
Yeah. So we talked briefly about how coastal markets behave differently. You mentioned there's been a big influx of buyers coming from New York and Philadelphia, especially when the city life gets a little hectic. What trends are you seeing now in the coastal property market? Where do you think it's heading?
Geez, it can change so quickly, but obviously during COVID, there was a situation where the New York and Philly were getting locked down pretty tight, and they live in very tight quarters there. So probably in a normal day in their life, people were out in the city, out and about, and now all of a sudden you got everybody home crammed into these little tiny spaces, right? So they decided to start taking road trips, and the beach was a great place to go. And since Sandy, I don't know if you remember what happened down here in Sandy, but the ocean basically broke through the island and became one with the bay. So they had to redo all the infrastructure down here. They did, the sewer pipes, the power lines. I mean, you name it, they redid all of it. And then since then, there's been a boom of housing built. So everything's getting torn down, and 3-story houses are being put up on top of stilts. And so these are pretty big houses, pretty modern houses. And a lot of the New Yorkers came out and bought these. And I hate to say it, but they're kind of like trophy houses to them now. They're like, yeah, I have a shore house. They don't show up.
Mm-hmm.
So like last summer, it was pretty quiet down here as people were starting to travel more again, because, international travel opened up again. New York was back to normal. So they didn't have to leave the city. They could go out in the city and have a good time. So they stopped coming down here. So it was a little empty here last year, which is something that was surprising.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see the similarities between where you're at in the coastal properties and where I'm at, where we've got a lot of lakes around here, but it's kind of been the same development. Like we've had a lot of lake homes that got purchased and tore down and building these monstrosities that people rarely show up to.
Yeah.
It's interesting to hear what's going on around you is similar to what's going on here.
Yeah. And then another thing that happened, so the schools opened up earlier this past season for some reason,
I
like a
think
week earlier.
I think so, yeah.
And so in the middle of August, everybody disappeared. And
Yeah.
now all the kids are involved in some kind of extracurricular activity. Most of those
Yeah.
activity require them to be back in the middle of August, mandatory
Mhm.
practice. Well, even if only one of their kids has to be back for mandatory practice, the whole family leaves. So last year, the last 2 weeks of August, eat out. That was
Huh.
unusual.
Yeah. Same thing happens here. It seems earlier and earlier they leave. They'll come back for an event here, a festival or something on that order, the
Exactly.
holidays. But
Yeah.
as far as long-term stay into the fall, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So you also said one of your core specialties is probate real estate, which is something a lot of agents avoid. What led you to specialize in probate transaction, and what makes that process different for families going through it?
Well, being that I spent many years in corporate, right, I was used to structure. And so, the 42-day promise is a service level agreement that I do, which makes me somewhat unique from my competition in that, I lay out this is what I'm going to do over the next 3 weeks. This is when I'm going to do it, how I'm going to do it. And if I don't do it the way that I promised, you can fire me. Right. Well, when you're doing work with probate, you have an added situation, which is that there are players involved in the transaction that can be sued or held accountable if for some reason the house is not handled properly. Because whether it's the state of New Jersey that, when somebody passes away, they may be in hospice, or maybe they're not passed away yet. Maybe you're just selling the house because you have to pay for their care. Well, the state of New Jersey says, we believe the house is worth $300,000 and you got to get us $300,000. They don't want us selling it for $250,000 to an investor who's going to fix it up and turn around and sell it for $500,000. Or they think that we're somehow, pulling a fast one on them, stealing their money. I've had to really put together a system to say, no, we're going to do this very structured. And this leads back to my methodology of, knowing how many showings I should get and whether or not we have it priced right. And being able to go back to them and prove to them, hey, we had this many showings, we had this many offers, we got these offers for this amount, and these closing, scenarios and everything like that. And this is the most money you're going to get for this house. Um, if you keep it on the market longer, the number's going to get lower, not higher. So, and when you're dealing with bureaucrats, they don't move fast. And so sometimes you actually have to get an attorney involved, and the attorney needs facts. They need numbers. They need statistics. They need something they can go to a bureaucrat with and prove their point. So my system lends itself to that type of environment. And that's, I like, when you're the executor of an estate, the heirs can come back and sue you for not, not getting them enough money.
Right.
There's all kinds of, you have to be bonded. You have to have good credit. There's, when you become the executive of an estate, you're held to a really high standard. And you're allowed to collect in New Jersey 5% of the value of the estate for the work that you're doing to manage the estate. Now, some executors won't take it. They have the option of not taking it. But either way, if they can come to me and have me do the work that they would otherwise have to do, and by the work, I mean, when I walk into these homes, they look like they've been ransacked, right? Right out of a TV crime scene movie where somebody came in and went through all the drawers and was looking for something and just pulled the drawers open, rummaged through everything, threw it all on the ground, and went through the whole house like that. That's what I typically walk into, because some of the heirs have been there and they've gone through looking for jewelry and for money and whatever else of value they could find. And then they
Mhm.
left the place a wreck. And the executor walks in and goes, "What the hell? Like, I got to deal with this, you know? And usually the executor is somebody who's financially well off, usually the smartest of the bunch, right? Has good credit, and this is a distraction to them. This is not really something fun for them to do, you know, and they've got other people who have their hands out like, come on, get me my money. Where's my money? I want my money. You know, what's taking so long? What's the holdup? And so they can offload a lot of that work to me. I'll come in and I'll look at the place, and I can get a contractor in to clean it up. I can get it painted. I can get some floors put down if need be. Do that as it's a value added service. So there is a charge for it, but it's more of a project management type of a thing. So if I can get a handyman in there to do everything, then it's minimal. But if I have to, like, I've had an experience, give you a really good example. There was a chimney on the side of the house that when I went into the house, I looked at the inside and I saw this crack. And I saw this crack forming and going up the wall. So I realized, oh, the chimney is actually sinking into the ground and pulling away from the house. Right. And, sooner or later, it was just going to topple over. And they didn't really need the chimney. It was it was a retirement community, adult community. So looked at that and said, all right, we got to get somebody in here to tear this thing down. We're not going to be able to fix it. And then after we tear it down, we need to close up the wall. And after we tear it down, we've got siding that doesn't match anymore. So what are we going to do? And this is where I'm very creative. So there was another wall in the house that nobody could see that had the same color siding. So we were able to take the siding off of that wall, put it over on the wall where the chimney was, which was very visible, and redo the siding on the other wall with the same basic color, but you can never get a perfect match, right? So that wall was in a spot where nobody would notice that we used the same basic color, a little bit different style siding, put the whole thing back together. Place looked great, sold no problem. So, I have an extra fee for each contractor that I have to bring in because I typically will get 3 bids. So if I, like with this one where I had to have somebody tear it down, I went out and got 3 contractors to come in and give us their prices, and the prices are significantly different. $12,000. That's no joke, right? And usually it comes down to somebody has expertise that the other one doesn't have, or some kind of equipment that the other one doesn't have.
Well, I think sometimes you really earn your money on some of these deals, I'm sure, because anytime you're dealing with heirs, and family members, sometimes they have a wide range of opinions on how things should be handled.
Yeah. So one of the other things I do is I prepare something called an ARV, and whenever I do business with an investor, investors use ARVs. It's after repair value. So I'll walk into the estate and it's ransacked, and most of the executors are like, "Oh, we got to sell it for pennies on the dollar. I can't handle this. This is too much work. Just find an investor and take it off my hands. Get it out of And yeah, an investor will give them 60 cents on the dollar in a heartbeat,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then the investor will make all kinds of money. And that's generally accepted in the industry to do that. It's not really frowned upon. But what I'll do is I'll do an ARV and I'll say, let's say this house should be worth $400,000, and an investor will give you $300,000. So I'll say, how about if you give me 4 weeks and $10,000, and I get you $385,000? Well, in some cases, the estates are underwater. People die, they have debts that they owe, right? And if $300,000 is not enough money to cover their debts, because maybe they had a mortgage, so you got to pay off the mortgage. So let's say there was $200,000 in the mortgage. So you got another $100,000 to play with that has to pay off all their other debts. And they might be right at the hairy edge of not being able to pay off all their debts. And guess who has to pay them? The heirs.
Mm-hmm.
They come after the heirs. So you want to make sure you're maximizing the value of the the property. So nobody can come
Yeah.
after you and say that you gave it away.
Yeah.
So they give me, and I don't do anything to a property that takes more than 4 weeks, maybe 6 on the outset. We figure, give me 2 weeks to get the quotes together and 4 weeks to get the work done. And then we throw it on the market, and I show them the price that we're going to list it at ahead of time. So the changes that we're doing, the modifications that we're making are tied to a finish, a level of finish.
Hmm.
So there's no question about what, is this thing going to be, granite countertops? No, we're still going to have Formica countertops. They're going to be clean. The place is going to be neat. We're not going to upgrade it. We're just making it livable. And that way it's marketable, and we're going to get rid of any kind of problems that would stop it from, I don't know if you're familiar with COs, but in New Jersey, certain towns have certificates of occupancy where
Oh,
so the township will come in and inspect a property and determine whether it's habitable or not. And if it's not habitable, it's usually because of a safety issue. So electrical outlets, wrong polarity, smoke detector's not working, carbon monoxide detector not working, things that would potentially kill you. So that's what most of the towns are worried about. Some towns are a little bit more than that. They'll look at the window. You ever notice a fogged window? Some towns will call out a fogged window. They'll say that window's failed. You need to replace that pane of glass.
wow.
Yeah. So depending on the town, I come in and I'll say, all right, well, we know that we're going to have to replace that pane of glass. We don't have to do it now because it's going to come up on inspection, but let me get you that 385. Let's get it under contract for 385, and then we'll have a few weeks before closing to fix the window. Or we can just give them $200 and they can have it fixed after. But
Right.
so we do everything that's cosmetic in order to make the house look good. And I give them a list of all the things that are structural or systemic or safety issues that may have to be addressed in order to actually get to the closing table. Of course, inspector can come in and find even more stuff than what I find, but there's always that risk. But this is, and that's the advantage that most people see to selling to an investor for pennies on the dollar, is that they don't have to deal with any of that. But when you have an extra $85,000, it's worth it for most people. So I had to
Yeah.
give another $2,000 away for
Yeah.
something when I got $85,000. And
It's kind of a no-brainer.
all the arguing amongst the heirs stops too, which is interesting.
Sure. Funny how that works. One thing I really appreciated hearing on our call when you said, I'm a solo entrepreneur, it's just me. A lot of people glamorize entrepreneurship, but there's a reality to building something on your own. What have you learned about running a solo real estate business that most people don't realize?
Doing these interviews, I interview other people, and I've been trying to do these kind of interviews as often as, I don't know, once a week maybe. And it's great because you would think that in this business I'd be talking to people all the time. But, the reality is a lot of it is sitting on a computer looking for houses, trying to find something that's going to work, writing up
Right.
contracts. The amount of time that I'm actually out showing houses or meeting with somebody for a listing presentation is a small amount of time in comparison to all the other paperwork and everything else that I have to do. So, doing these interviews and, remembering how to talk spontaneous and keep my vocabulary up, when you spend too much time alone.
Yeah, when you talk to yourself, you kind of lose the edge, don't you?
Yeah, it's funny. And
Oh, that's interesting. I think people don't realize that most of that work is behind the scenes. The only time, I guess, maybe as a real estate, you're really visible is if you're at some kind of event and you're out in front of people. But
yeah,
yeah, for the most part, there's a lot of behind the scenes and behind the computer work that happens.
a lot. Yeah. And being that my background is such that, I do have administrative assistants. So even though I say it's
Mhm.
only me, but I'm the only agent in my office. But I have two assistants, one that does transaction coordination and the other one that helps me do like, you know, marketing, things more business development side.
Yeah.
So, but again, like they don't work with me here. We talk once or twice a day and they're off doing their thing.
So you also shared a great story about working in corporate environments where sometimes success wasn't always rewarded the way you expected it to be. You described a situation where you'd solve problems creatively because that's what entrepreneurs do and that's what was needed, and that sometimes clashes with the corporate culture. How did those experiences shape the way you run your own business today?
Well, as you can see, I by myself, so don't have much politics in my office. And I worked for some places that were highly political. I mean, the pinnacle of politics was at Princeton University. So I was there for 3.5 years, and I was a data analyst there, and I was involved in a project called the Core Database. And the idea was that we were going to take all the people who had ever been affiliated with the university and put them all together in one database. Right now, you might think like, didn't they already have that? But we're talking 20 years ago, and right around the Y2K, when they had mainframe systems and stuff like that. And so it's interesting because you wouldn't think this, but the library is the best source of a student's home address because they want their books. All right. When you're at Princeton University, you have some people who say they live in one place, but they really live in another. All right. Because the prince of some country who happens to be going to school there, nobody can really know where that person lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. Or Brooke Shields went to Princeton University and she wasn't in any of our databases. So, you got some unique things going
Yeah.
on there.
Yeah.
But you had the finance office that gave loans to people for their school, or in our case, we even got loan. Like I was qualified to get a loan for a house, so they would give me a 40-year loan at 1 percentage point below market rate if I wanted to buy a house within 8 miles of Princeton University. So that system was the best, let's say, system of record for address of somebody who had a loan. But then you had development who was raising money for the school, and development had the best source of information for anybody who had ever attended the university in the past or their major donors. And so this idea that we were going to create one database that had the best address for somebody was so political. And development wanted to be in control of it, the library wanted to be in control of it, the registrar of the students wanted to be in control of it, the finance wanted to be in control, like everybody wanted to be in control of it. And then we were like, well, how about IT is in control of it? They were like, like that was like even worse than any of the other ones, right? Because like IT,
Mm-hmm.
nobody can control that beast, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. So it was a funny time. There was technical solutions for stuff, but you could not get anybody to agree.
Now the only person you have to argue with is yourself,
Yeah, yeah. And I do that all day.
which is also part of your lifestyle then. So that's an interesting angle of that you brought up the other day. You actually moved to the island specifically to be part of the surf community, and that surfing is one of the reasons you chose to live there. How important is lifestyle alignment when building a business in a place like that?
You know, um, I mean, for me, it's important. I don't know about other people, but I think it definitely helps me when I'm talking to uh, buyers who are thinking about coming into the area. Knowing the lay of the land and you know the different sections of the beaches and towns and what one has to offer versus another. You know, not like we have a lot of crime down here, but Seaside Heights obviously is, the Jersey Shore, the TV
Mm-hmm.
show, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously you got a
Mm-hmm.
certain element that you don't have
Mm-hmm.
in other parts of the island. Going the other direction to, like, let's say Bay Head or Maniloking, where that's where you have the estates. You have like Bay Head would be considered legacy money, you know, properties that are handed down from family to family. Whereas Maniloking is more, I mean, I'm sure there's some legacy money there too, but you'll have somebody who became rich and famous who just wants to have this gigantic house right on the beach, I mean, amazing houses. Like, if you drove down the strip, it's just crazy. And so, that's very different from, let's say, Lavalette, which is sort of a little town where you have shops, you have people who live here all year round, you have businesses that are open all year round. It's a bigger part of the island. It's a little thicker. Some sections of the island are very narrow. You could walk from one section to the other, from the bay to the ocean, in a couple minutes. Whereas Lavalette section, you're gonna be walking for probably 20 minutes. So
Well,
yeah.
it's also advantageous to be very close to an activity that allows you to decompress whenever you feel the need.
Yeah, well, I wish that that was true. So it's a funny thing about two things, about the real estate business and about waves. So waves come when they want to come. They're not there all the time. When you become, we have this argument with the people who control access to the beach, like the lifeguards and stuff like that. So in the summertime,
Mhm.
they're like, you can surf here. And we're like, yeah, but the waves are there. Well, this is where the surfing beach is. Well, Mother Nature doesn't care that you said that this is the surfing beach. Mother Nature's putting the waves over there. So how about you move the swimmers over there so we can go where the waves are? Obviously, we don't win those arguments, but that's sort of our point of view on it. So we have to go in early in the morning, or we have to go in after the lifeguards go home. Another funny thing about that, you'll get a kick out of this, is when the beaches are closed, they're closed for swimmers. They're open for surfers, right?
Hmm.
So when they close the beaches, we go run into the beach, right? And because then theoretically we can surf anywhere we want. Well, sometimes they even try to control where we surf, even when the beach is closed. I'm like, you closed the beach and you're still going to say I can't surf here?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's weird. Anyway, that's one of the things that you get challenged with. And so, and then of course, I was saying the flip side of it is, when you're in this business, your customers come first. So,
Right.
if there's waves that day and I decide to go surfing rather than, meet with my customer, not really great for business.
No, no, you can't hand it off to somebody else.
Right.
That's the problem. So, looking ahead in the next 12 to 24 months, what signals are you watching in the housing market or the coastal property market that will tell you things are moving in the right direction?
Oof. I think before we started, I said I'm one of these guys that looks out the window to see what the weather is. I don't, you know, I feel like now, after doing this for 20 years, there have been times, I'll give you 2 points, two that you'll, identify with. When the mortgage meltdown occurred in 2006 through 2008, I remember the middle of the summer 2006 when the market started to drop. And I stuck in to this business all the way through to the bottom of 2008. That was a rough period of time. What I realized, though, from that experience was that there was still always business to be had. So instead of selling houses to home buyers, I was selling short sales, pre-foreclosures,
Yeah.
REOs. I was selling more to investors. That's how I got involved in doing the ARVs. And people still were dying, as so probate was stable, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
another reason, people die in no matter what market it is, right?
Yes, they
So,
do.
um, and then what happened when the lab leak occurred in 2019? I was my master's is in management of technology, right? So I had been watching the mRNA CRISPR. I don't know if you're familiar with CRISPR is, but CRISPR is an editing tool that they use to make the mRNA.
Okay, sure.
All
Yeah.
right. And so I had been following that technology because I wanted to invest in that space because I knew that was going to be a growth industry. And so I had heard about the lab leak in 2019 because of the circles I was in. And it was kind of funny at the time because it was it was China blaming the US and the US was blaming China. It turns
Hmm.
out they were both right because it was US technology in a Chinese lab. So,
Yeah, right.
right? So they were both right. But at that point in time, I thought to myself, "Oh man, this is." And I had gone to my primary care physician, and I said to her, I said I heard there's a lab leak in China. I don't know how that's going to affect me. Like, I think I'm going to get a vaccine. Like, what's the latest vaccine for the flu? And so she looks up the schedule. She's like, well, you get this vaccine, and she goes, and you never had the shingles vaccine either, right? And I said, no, no, I never did. She goes, well, you're the right age for the shingles vaccine. I said, all right, so took the vaccines and I got hurt. I ended up with neuropathy really bad on my feet. And that was an eye opener for me because I was like, whoa, you know, I mean, I could not take bed sheets, and just pull them up over my feet. I had to puff them in the air and let them drape down because you would have thought you were dragging me along the pavement.
Hmm.
Neuropathy is unbelievably painful. And then I had to go for shock therapy or whatever to get it to go away. Turns out your nerves are dying and they're screaming out in their last, it's the way they explain it to me. They're screaming out saying, help me, help me, help me. I'm
Hmm.
dying. You need to keep me alive. Right. So
Hmm.
that's pretty wild, but I'm better now. Great. But at the time, I realized that, this is a pretty big deal, what's coming. And so I went out and I opened my own brokerage. So in the middle of COVID, I opened my own brokerage. Now, at the time, I thought we were going to go through another 2006, 2008. Little
Hmm.
did I know I'd have one of the best years or two of my life in real estate because I wasn't afraid to go out. People still needed to buy and sell houses. I had my own brokerage, so I didn't have all the corporate rules constraining me. You know, People loved it. I was like, yeah, I'll do business. Let's go. You know,
Yeah.
and so, but my point to that whole thing is, I thought the market was going to collapse, and it went up. And in 2006, 2008, I actually bought a house at the time thinking, well, this could never last that long. When has the housing market ever gone down and the stock market gone down? It's never happened in history. Well, that year it did. I
Yes.
look at it and I say, I'm just going to have to be creative to figure out how to solve the problem when the problem comes. And
Hmm.
being that that's how I kind of grew up, and we talked before about in the corporate environment, sometimes you get in trouble for solving problems, and nobody ever gets me in trouble when I'm in my own business solving problems.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about six, oh six through oh eight. I was a I was a financial advisor during that period of time. And yeah, those were hard times. Hard
Oh yeah,
times to just to be able to talk with people and give them some reassurance that things are going to be all right in the end, but it's going to be dicey for a while. And that was hard on a lot of people. I have a lot of colleagues that they 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 took it really hard just because their clients did. And they felt responsible for it. And sometimes stuff just happens. I mean, it's investing is carries risk no matter what it's in.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And even like with houses, you look at the housing market, and okay, it took a hit for a while, but you only really took the hit if you were forced to sell. If
Absolutely.
you weren't forced to sell, you did pretty well. You came out
Mm-hmm.
of it just fine. I wasn't really happy about what the banks did to people because at the time the banks would do these mortgage modifications. And what they would do is they would take let's say you couldn't afford your mortgage at 200,000, but if your mortgage was only 150,000, you could afford it. So they would take the $50,000 off the top. They'd create a judgment against you for when you sold the house in the future,
Mm-hmm.
so that they could recapture that 50,000. And so that was their loan modification. And then they would put people right at the hairy edge of defaulting again. So you've got these people who are just been through hell, living right on the edge and like fear of losing their houses, and maybe it was a job loss, a death in the family. I mean, God only knows all the different things that happen to people at that time that put them in that situation. And then they put them right back at the hairy edge of collapse. And then they would double dip because the federal government was giving the banks money to balance their balance sheet. So they were taking the $50,000 off of your loan, but still putting a judgment against you. So when you sold it one day, they'd get the $50,000 back. It's like, wow. And nobody was checking on this?
No, right. Well, where can people find you, Drew? Give us your locations and
Sure.
your any place else we can reach out to you if we need to.
I realized that I hadn't talked about my chart on the wall behind me during our interview, and it's probably something that I should explain really quickly before we wrap it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is a curve that represents the market of buyers, right? So buyers generally have sort of a cliff, as you can see. They can afford up to a certain amount, and then when they get towards the edge, their ability to buy drops off pretty quickly. And that's because they have most buyers are buying with a mortgage, and the mortgage company said this is how much you can afford. So the only way that they can change that is either by adding a bigger down payment, increasing their credit score, which is not easy to do. Even putting a bigger down payment is not easy unless you get a gift from a family member or you get a seller's concession or something like that. So you'll see that represents that sort of cliff. And the important part about that is back to the pricing theory that we were talking about before, that if you price too far down on the curve here, the people that are on this end of the curve are the only people who are left that can afford your house. And you don't really want it to be that small a number of people. So you want to be up here, somewhere closer to here. And that gives you all these people under the curve that can afford your house. And
Mm-hmm.
that creates a competitive bidding situation. Now, if you're too aggressive and let's say you price over here, well, now you have a ton of people under the curve who can afford your house. And all that really does is drive it right up the curve. So what I find is that as long as you don't price down here, you're going to get top dollar for your house. The irony is if you price down here, you're going to end up somewhere over here. If you price, the closer you are to this band right in between these two, you're going to be further down the line because all these people back here are going to push the price up the curve for you.
Mm-hmm.
So the market finds its own equilibrium as long as you don't overprice. And then part of my system that we talked about is the first 21 days, as I make an agreement in my service level agreement that we're not going to accept the first offer that comes through the door. So if you could imagine, you price it here, the market knows a good deal. They're going to be all over that. Somebody's going to come in and they're going to put a full price offer and they say, I'll close in 2 weeks. Please take it off the market. And my response is, I appreciate your offer. We're not ready to negotiate. We've got 7 more showings lined up for this weekend. We're going to make sure everybody gets to see the house. We're going to make sure everybody gets their opportunity to put in their best offer, their best foot forward. Mm-hmm. And then we'll make a decision once everybody's gotten a chance to see the house. Now, the buyer's agents are very happy when they hear that because they're afraid that I have a pocket buyer. They're afraid I have somebody in my pocket and I'm going to sell the house to somebody else for, give them a great deal. And I imagine there probably are other agents out there that do stuff like that. I'm not one of them. All right. So by keeping the house on the market for at least a week, preferably at least 2 weeks is what my agreement says. The last week, you end up getting under attorney review. in New Jersey, we have an attorney review process, which usually takes about a week. So we keep the house actively listed for 3 weeks. And that makes sure that everybody got a chance to see it. Everybody got a chance to put an offer in. And the buyer's agents are very happy that they're going to get a chance to put their best offer on the table. Because that's what they really care about, is they want to, like, tell me I at least have a chance. Like, you're going to tell me, you're going to give me time. I give them a couple days. I say, we've had this many showings. We've got 3 offers. I'll tell them if we're over asking already or not. I will never tell them how high. But, obviously, if we're priced down in this price range here, we probably got a full price offer. So I'll tell them, yes, we're over asking, and we're going to, next Thursday at 5 o'clock, get me your best offer, and I'll give you an answer on Friday morning. And they're very happy to hear that they're going to get enough time to put their offer together, do their research on the market, shop around for the best loan that gets the best deal, the best rate, whatever, to increase their buying power for their client. And, that works out great for them. So
Perfect. That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
I still just want you to tell everybody where you can be found so that you can start getting more listings.
Sounds good. So my company name is Sweet Spot Real Estate. I spell it with Z's so that I didn't have any problems with, being thought of as a sweet shop or something like that. And so I was able to get that domain name. So it's ZWEETZPOT.com. So that's an easy way to find me. I do have a special website dedicated to the Barrier Island for the geographic area, and that's islandbeachnjhomes.com. So that covers everything from Seaside Park to Point Pleasant. That's a stretch and everything in between. And then, of course, my phone number, 791-9594. That's my Google Voice number. You leave your name, and I'll get back to you.
Sounds perfect. Thanks for joining us, Drew. This has been a very, very enlightening, very interesting conversation. I find your data-driven approach to be pretty unique, not a story I've heard to this point. And I think that's very interesting for everybody that's going to watch this. It's not a point of view that everybody hears.
Yeah.
Well, best of luck, Drew.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on another episode of Industry Insiders. We'll see you next time.